Hi, and welcome to Hoop Clash, where you can put your basketball intellect to the test. Today we have Cameron and Josh here to battle their wit and see who comes out on top. Cameron, we're going to go to you for opening statements first. Let's get it on.
Fantastic. I'll kind of keep this brief. I want to start off as I think there is a real difference between playoff basketball and regular season basketball. Playoffs, can you maintain your efficiency, your volume whenever you've got the best coming at you night in, night out, as well as teams focusing on stopping what your go-tos are. So that's why we picked the team we picked. We've got our starting five of Chauncey Billups, Dwayne Wade, Kawhi Leonard, Rasheed Wallace, and Pau Gasol, who all either maintain or actually advance their level of play in the postseason, which I think is very valuable in this setting. Um, Secondly, we wanted to focus on can you be exploited defensively? That is the name of the game over the past decade or so in basketball, whereas they will spam pick and roll, spam certain play types, or just focus on kind of putting the spotlight on where you are weak. And that's where our starting five, as well as our bench that we're going to be playing, doesn't have a lot of that to them. In terms of our specific matchup that we're coming up against, we're going to be doing a lot of the same things our opponents can be doing, which is pushing the pace of play. They probably think they've got the advantage there. We think we do. I think in reality, it's probably pretty close to a push. We've got five guys that can grab the ball off the board and push the tempo, as well as some guys that can get downhill pretty easily from those spots. In the half court, once again, we think that we've got an advantage there in terms of seeking out some opportunities with some high level half court finishers, play finishers whenever our natural motion doesn't get to it. We will be very physical with Steph. Their highlight, I will argue that he is a top three offensive player ever in the league, and you could say that he's the best offensive player in the league ever. And I'm not going to say you're wrong there. So being very physical with him, between Billups, Wade, Kawhi, even put some Tayshaun on Prince on him. A lot of length, a lot of physicality. We're going to be helping off of their bigs, which we don't think can beat us, to stop the guy that we do think can beat us. We're also going to be tightening our rotation. We're going to have our starters plus heavy minutes for Robert Horry, Tyrese Halliburton, who I know I said the thing about playoff basketball. He hasn't had that yet. So you can poke holes in it. I don't think it's a positive or a negative from that standpoint because he hasn't been able to show it, as well as Tayshaun Prince. As the series goes, we'll see whether we can play Gordon Hayward or not. It really depends on, I think our big goal is stopping Steph as well as getting to our offense and capitalizing on some of those pieces that we think we can get some exploitiveness on with their defense. I know we got a couple seconds left, so I'll go ahead and hand it off to Josh, and I think we kind of get the intro summed up for us.
Thanks, Cameron. And Josh, like you said, we'll kick it off to you.
Yeah, the first off, I want to say I think this is going to be the most exciting of the matchups. I think both teams are going to be pushing the pace really hard, and I think both teams are well equipped to make this a very entertaining, fun game along with a hard fought game. I like their team. I think they're very well set up. Like you said, I think it's closer to a push in transition. Although I do think, due to the number of better 3-point shooters that we have in terms of both accuracy and volume specifically, that I think we have a slight edge, particularly in transition, because you're going to have to be spaced out on most of our guys. On top of it, we have three of the deadliest transition threats in basketball history in Steph, who you can't leave at all. Chuck, who is a human cannonball, unstoppable. He's the juggernaut from X-Men. And Vince Carter, who is not only probably the greatest vertical threat of all time, but also a very good 3-point shooter as well. So we think, yes, the transition, at least in terms of possessions, is going to be close to a push, but we think we'll have an efficiency edge given those players. On top of it, Mikal Bridges is highly efficient in transition, and Dale Ellis, who will be getting a little bit more minutes this series, is also a deadly threat that has to be taken into consideration all the time. Mikal Bridges is going to. I didn't even mention my starting lineup. We have Steph Curry, Vince Carter, Mikal Bridges, Charles Barkley, and Al Horford. On top of that, off the bench, we have see, this is tired dad brain. We have Brandon Roy, Dale Ellis, Doug Christie, and then James Worthy and Steven Adams aren't going to get a lot of minutes. Steven Adams is probably going to play when Chuck is off the court so that we always maintain an elite rebounder and somewhat of an antagonist, somebody who's maybe going to push Rashid to get a couple techs and maybe miss a game of our series. Just saying it might happen. And then Doug Christie is probably going to play when Tyrese Halliburton is in. We're not that threatened by most of the players coming off picks. We'll fight over on Chauncey and Tyrese and maybe Kawhi. Everyone else, we're going to play a more drop zone type pick and roll coverage.
All right, thanks, Josh. Now we'll go ahead and move on to the open debate portion of this. Cameron, let's go ahead and get to you for the first feedback.
I did forget. I've got a bone to pick with you, Pat. You didn't introduce me properly as reigning champ. You didn't have Michael Jordan walking out there without his kind of turn down the lights and hyping him up. You don't have LeBron James without his tossing up the powder. And I don't think I got introduced properly. But anyways, reigning champ over here. I do have. Come on, Josh. You pick Vince Carter, who's my favorite player, like my first favorite player ever. This isn't more of a question, it's more kind of an address. I think I kind of mentioned the exploitative nature of basketball nowadays. Charles Barkley and Robert Horry actually have some history playing against each other. I do a lot of research on these, actually watching games as well. And I figured that Horry wouldn't be matched up with Barkley as much in their matchups, but he was almost matched up exclusively. And here's a couple stats for you on this. From 93 to 95, Barkley had 6 non-Horry matchups. And he averaged 28.5, 13.5, 4.5 on 50, 22, or 27 and 77 with 2 turnovers in those. In the Horry matchups, it was 23, 13, 3.5, 4, 46, 28, 74 shooting splits with more turnovers. So to break that down, 5.5 points worse, 1 assist worse, less efficient from the field with more turnovers, 3-point attempts, and fewer free throw attempts. So Barkley has shown proclivity to getting in those matchups and not taking into paint because Horry is a tough matchup. We're going to play him heavier minutes, especially on Barkley. And are you using Barkley as a hub? I know you kind of mentioned that before in the half court, kind of in that DHO spot. Is that something you guys are anticipating on doing?
Yeah, I think one of the arguments we had in a previous round was that, Barkley's going to be operating out of the post. With us, that's not the best for our team. Yeah. Barkley is going to be operating a lot with dribble handoffs. He's going to be sending a lot of picks for Vince and Steph and Brandon Roy. And again, Chuck is a human cannonball. Him coming down as the roll man is going to be a lot more efficient, I think, than a lot of the post-up heavy offenses that he tended to be in because of the era back then. I do think that you make a valid point that Horry is going to have some effect on him, but I guarantee you the net out of that is still going to be positive for Chuck over Horry. So I don't think we lose that matchup or anything. And I do think it's going to be harder to contain Chuck, given that he's going to be running handoffs and setting picks for a spacer like Steph and for a threat like Vince, who not only, again, is the greatest vertical threat we've ever seen, best dunker, but also a very accomplished three-point shooter and attacker off the dribble himself. So I don't think it's going to play out the same way that it did back then. But yeah, I think there might be some effect, but I think it'll be mitigated by the benefit of having to then deal with how do you defend this action with Steph being the other person in the situation, or with a threat like Vince, or even somebody like a Brandon Roy or a Dale Ellis.
Yeah, I'll say we are selling out pretty heavy on Steph on these. So we're giving Barkley a cushion. I think that's probably the biggest negative on him as a career is that there's some guys that you question from that era whether they could or couldn't shoot if given adequate volume and opportunity, because a lot of those shots they were taking were in a shot clock or in situations. Chuck just, I mean, succinctly, like he was a chucker, and he didn't do it well. And I think we've already seen that his 3-point volume does increase whenever you sag off him. So that is something we're going to do as a team is him, as well as Adams. Whenever he's in the lineup, we're going to, add that additional help towards the rim with whether Vince is diving, whether Chuck's diving, or tagging Steph off those screens. I'm a little surprised at you guys, honestly, from your team standpoint, because I feel like you did go more overall talent in the fit that you normally go with in terms of those DHO things and everything else. Because I think the thing that's not been stated is that Horford's good, Barkley's good, and those are more reactionary playmakers in my viewing of the games than maybe Draymond, who's more kind of initiating those things. I think that's where Curry gets a lot of his value from, is actually having Draymond being such a high level screener and playmaker from those. So I think in the transition, in the full court side, things like you said before, I think you are going to be able to put the pedal to the metal. You mentioned the 3-point shooting. Our postseason play 3-point shooting across the board, 3-year samples, which could go on and on about the 3-year sample versus whatever else, but Billups 42% from 3 over that 3 years, Wade 38%. I'm not saying Wade's a shooter. Never gonna say that. I'm just saying that if he's wide open, he might be able to do something. But he's gonna be on ball most time. Kawhi 41%, Sheed 40%, Ori 39%, Prince 41%, Hayward 41%. So that's pretty solid in terms of running those transition. I know you said you got an advantage there. I'm getting a little wordy. I don't even know what my point is. Just want to get more stuff on the table. So I'm just going to give you like 5 minutes to go for it. So.
Okay. Well, first off, yes, Chuck in the past has been a bit of a chucker, but it's also a different type of play nowadays. We're going to be running a different type of offense. And the problem with dropping off of somebody and daring them to shoot is you give them momentum. And again, Chuck is one of the greatest cannonball rollers we've ever seen. And I think giving him that cushion, yes, he might take a couple of bad shots, but I think he's also going to be attacking the paint against you on hard rolls more than we've seen in the past. So I think in that case, it's not going to be as cut and dry as you make it out to be. And you did note, and I agree, that your guys did have good 3-point percentages in the playoffs over those 3-year samples. The thing is, and we mentioned this in a long thing in the chat for another matchup, 3-point percentages do not necessarily equate to spacing. You might shoot a good percentage from 3, but if I don't think you're going to take 10 threes, I'm not as concerned about that. And most of your guys have not really been high volume guys. The only ones I particularly worry about in terms of excessive volume would be Halliburton, would be Billups. Oddly, Ori's gotten a lot of. Ori got up 14 threes in a game, and he hit 9 in a game. So there are a couple of guys that we'd be a little concerned with in that regard. But again, I think the volume from 3 is definitely on our advantage. And especially considering Dale Ellis is going to be getting more minutes, and we'll probably be running some more smaller lineups when Powell is off the court. When you have Sheed or Ori as your center, and it sounds like you're not really playing Robert Williams, Barkley can get away with playing the small ball 5, and we could put out another shooter like Dale Ellis on there, and then you're going to be stretched pretty thin. And yes, you have very strong defenders, but it's going to be very tough when you're going against, as you yourself said, arguably the greatest offensive impact player in NBA history, the greatest off-ball shot creator of all time. On top of it, Mikal Bridges is a very capable off-ball scorer. Vince Carter, like I said, is the greatest vertical spacing threat we've ever seen. Chuck is a hell of a roll threat. Al Horford can pop, can roll. Like you said, they're not Draymond level in terms of those handoffs, but when you're playing with Steph, Brandon Roy, Vince Carter, Dale Ellis, you don't have to be Draymond. Also, Draymond was picked before I could get him, Cameron. You know this. So, honestly, I think it's a very good matchup. I think it'd be a very hard fought game. I do think that we have the edge when it comes to the volume of 3-point shooting, and not just from a variability standpoint, that we can get more of them up. We have some of the very best shooters of all time on our team, and you have very good shooters, but they're not Pantheon level shooters. And on top of it, I think we have guys who can adjust to whatever role they need to play during the game. Obviously, we picked certain peak years, but I mean, Mikal Bridges has been able to play the best role he can for a championship contender. And he's also been able to step up in minutes where we need a little bit more usage out of him. Vince Carter went from, destroying opponents to being able to fit in wherever he needs to be over his 22-year career. So I think we have a lot of versatility in how we can approach matchups with you. And on top of it, I look forward to the Rasheed Wallace, Charles Barkley headbutting, potentially actual headbutting people. Considering those two people, I would not envy the refs, is all I'm saying. And that's my say for now.
It's going to be a fight. Two things. One, Vince Carter, I think you kind of mentioned it, like whenever he went from being the guy to being more of a cog in it. I love Vince Carter. He's still more of a grab and hold guy than a quick decision maker on anything. More of a play finisher than playmaker on those things. That's something we're kind of want to forcing a lot of your guys in. Other than Steph, I know you mentioned you got kind of these elite shooters or upper tier. Other than Steph, who do you kind of view as being that above our team tier of shooter?
Dale Ellis primarily, and again, Vince. You have two great guys in Kawhi and Dwayne Wade. Not disputing that at all, but I think Vince is actually more of a threat in the style of play that we're going to be doing than Dwayne Wade is, because Vince combines that rim pressure with high quality 3-point shooting that Dwayne doesn't. And Kawhi has never really been particularly high volume in terms of his 3-point shooting. He's much more of a mid-range maestro. A fantastic mid-range maestro, mind you, and a very good 3-point shooter when he does, but he's not really been a high-volume guy. So that's kind of where I'm coming from in those regards.
As for Steph, I know we've kind of said some things before, and I am setting you up for something you've never had told you before, so I'm giving you a heads up on this. Steph defensively, as somebody that we can exploit, how do you feel on his defense?
First off, I think the Steph stuff is completely overblown, in large part because the team has decided to put Clay on a lot of point guards because they want to give more size against those point guards and probably save Steph a little bit of energy because of all the energy he operates on. I don't think it's the same thing as Jokic to me. Like, they're not bad defenders. Are they all defense? No. Are they actively harmful defenders? No. Now, is Steph going to struggle against Kawhi in an ISO? Yes, but we're not going to be switching and getting you in a position to have Kawhi ISO Steph all the time. I think Steph can defend Chauncey fairly well. I'm not overly concerned. I know that's a big thing that a lot of people like to talk about, but I think that's more of a false narrative, and Steph is at the worst like a neutral defender.
Okay, I agree with a lot of what you said, but for the sake of this, I'm still gonna quote.
Fair
um,
enough.
I think that him switching on to Kawhi or somebody else
He's not
is
going to though.
so
We're
how.
not switching.
Okay, so you're just gonna play at a disadvantage with the rotation.
See, that's another thing I disagree with current standards of like, well, switching is the best defense. I don't
Yeah.
necessarily think that is the case. Maybe in like 4 seconds left on the shot clock, we might switch some actions, but I trust most of our personnel to be able to do what we need to do to make sure that it's not a massive. And honestly, I'll ask you this straight up, Cameron. If you had the chance of running like a Kawhi ISO against Mikal Bridges nonstop, yes, you're going to get some points, but he's going to work for it a little bit.
Yeah.
Or if we were switching everything and you actually got to pick on guys you want to pick on, which one would you be salivating at more? The
Oh,
switching.
yeah, switching for
So
sure.
why would I switch?
I think that you and I kind of view your team a little bit differently then, because I
Yeah,
think
I'm sure we do.
yeah. I think that between like with strengths like Carter, Barkley, Roy, and Ellis are the big ones that kind of am picking on here, where our heavy motion, our screening, everything else like that. Whenever you're putting your team at a disadvantage to make those rotations and recoveries and everything else like that, I think all those guys fall short in terms of their attentiveness and also reactionary skills on that side. Um,
I'll
and
give you Ellis on that for sure.
well,
But
you
yeah,
got some of them, but yeah.
yeah, yeah.
But I mean, so I think that you create advantages within our offense for some high level and efficient scores that we've kind of already got. I agree with you. I think Jokic and Steph are actually probably good defenders, especially if you're trying to pick on the wrong things with them. Like if
Agreed.
I'm trying to go at him with Billups, like I think Steph's holding his own.
Yeah.
If he does switch
If
on,
you're trying to get Wade or Kawhi on him, then
right?
yes, that's going to be a problem. Which
Um,
is again why, like, yes, you are making an excellent point that given the style of offense you're playing, and that outside of Bridges and Horford, and to some extent like Steven Adams, we don't have great defenders across the board. But I think the fact that you have to run a lot of those actions as opposed to ISOing a switch or posting up a switch at
yeah.
least makes you work harder for your offense.
Oh
So, like,
yeah.
you might still get
Yeah.
advantages, but I think you're going to work for them more than if we just switched and then you could be like, okay, Kawhi's posting up Steph 10 times a game. Like, if that
Yeah.
were the case, then I'd vote for your team too, but it's not going to be the case.
And that's kind of where I was talking about the efficiency in the half court, because I think that we've got some, over the run of the full game, we're not going to be targeting these like little micro instances throughout unless there was a heavy switching or anything else. But I think in terms of creating these instances in the last 4 seconds of a shot clock, while also going through our entire half court offense where we're picking on these, consistent rotational pieces that you're putting your team in a position to, with those switches and everything else, or not switches, sorry, with your helping and other things without being able to leave somebody. I think looking at my team again, making sure there's no way you can leave. Yeah, without
I
leaving
mean,
kind of a high level offensive player. So
get, I wouldn't say you have a bunch of high level offensive, like Ori is not a high level offensive player. Tayshaun Prince is not a high level offensive player. Even Sheed is not a high level offensive player in the ways that we might leave him.
right,
So like we mentioned earlier, I'm not sold that 3-point percentage is necessarily worth, you know,
right.
not trying to stop a Dwayne Wade drive or a Kawhi drive if it's looking like a high percentage drive. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
yes, you have guys, especially in those playoff years, that can hit shots at a high volume, at a high percentage, but not necessarily at a high volume. And Patrick's got a hand up.
Okay.
So, like you mentioned, you're going to be running a lot of motion heavy offense in your half court, right? We
Yeah.
are too. So everything you kind of mentioned also is true of our offense too. However, you have some better individual defenders. I'm not questioning that, but we also, per your own statement, have the most impactful offensive player of all time, particularly off ball, and he's having interactions with guys like Charles Barkley, who can roll like a cannonball to the rim, with Vince Carter, who, if you like get over aggressive on that screen, Vince is now got a head of steam heading towards the hoop. I do think that everything you kind of mentioned half court wise, I don't think it's a major advantage over our team. It's probably more of a push, just like in transition. I think a lot of this is just going to come down to slight deviations in terms of efficiency, both in transition and half court. And I think your team's well set up to, like you said, in those clutch situations, you have guys like Wade, Kawhi, who traditionally have been really good in those situations, and I'm not questioning that. We also have Steph and Vince, who have also been very good in those situations. So I don't think it's necessarily a big advantage necessarily for either of our teams, to be honest. Like I said, we have 3 of the deadliest transition threats of all time. And just like you, we push every time on makes, misses, turnovers, everything. We are pushing the pace every time, and then immediately getting into motion with Steph moving around, Chuck and Vince operating strong side or weak side, whatever need be. I think we have players to make it tough for even your good defenders to kind of consistently stop us. And like I said, I think we do have an advantage in terms of volume from 3 on a good quantity. And I think in a matchup as evenly matched as this is, I think that might be a thing that puts us a little over the top. And honestly, I'll end my section with a little time left. I just would actually love to actually watch this matchup. I think it would be a fantastic matchup. I think it'd be a lot of fun. And win or lose, I like your team, Cameron. And I hope we win. But if we don't, I think it's going to be one hell of a 7-game series that would be a lot of fun to watch.
2 things. Appreciate it. I like this matchup and your teams historically on this and this year as well. Definitely enjoy this exercise. I didn't get it put out there earlier, so I will just kind of counteract everything I said because you never had this told to you before. I think your whole argument, with all due respect, ain't worth the velvet painting of a whale and dolphin getting it on. So just throw that junk out of here. Just but I did want to ask both of you guys a question, so you can take yourself off mute if you are. Do you guys know what the score was in the first half whenever Kawhi played the Golden State Warriors in 2017?
Not off the top of my head.
So they were down by 22 points whenever Kawhi got subbed out. This was Kawhi with the worst team, considerably worse team than he's got on my team right now, versus Steph with as great of a team as you can find. I'd argue that 2017 Warriors team with Steph, with Clay, with KD, with Draymond is probably taking any of these teams we put together out. And Kawhi was up 22 points single-handedly, basically.
It was not single-handedly, and we're talking a very small sample size. I get that you're making this argument, and I appreciate the argument, but
this is my
small
closing
sample
argument.
size
You
theater.
mute yourself again. I did not give you permission to unmute, so.
Also, whale at dolphin? What
Talladega Nights, tell me. So I knew you were gonna say small sample size. That was the conference finals. Over that postseason, Kawhi was averaging 28, 8, and 5 on 53, 46, 93 shooting. That was something that he kind of had taken this other level. And that's where, for me, Kawhi is a postseason player, which I value very, very highly. And every single postseason he's been in, he has elevated his game significantly, both in terms of volume and efficiency. Now, the Zaza thing happened, which was very fluky. And we've gotten shades of him afterwards where he's had to almost focus more on offense than defense because of all those things. But at that point, he's coming off of back-to-back Defensive Player of the Year. Put that award in kind of air quotes or whatever else. I think that defensive player and all defense, like, they kind of are fluky on things. But also, there's 2 wing defenders I've seen all time that made guys look They made all-stars look less all-starry, and they made good players look average, and that's Kawhi Leonard and Scottie Pippen. Just absolutely kind of dominate guys out there. So we've got this where we are taking some of the offensive load off him in terms of the half court and full court, except for end of shot clock and kind of picking our spots there. We also have Dwayne Wade, who is, and this is not something I'm going to argue in terms of like validating it, but I know my brother and I both watching him in the Olympics. I think it was in 2008. We're questioning whether he was the best player in the world. He was that freaking good. And I've barely talked about him during this whole thing, but he's going to have the ball in his hands for a significant amount, kind of trying to get downhill on all of these things. So it kind of hinges on those. If I had another 5 minutes, I would spend it talking about Robert Horry because he is the player that has transitioned my mindset the most and made me go to film. Whenever I was watching for Hakeem, honestly, years ago, the way he plays defensively in terms of rotations, on ball, effort, energy, getting to the rim. I've seen him help out on a 3-point shooter and get back to the rim to grab a rebound above, as well as as well as just being like the perfect off-ball player. It's not a fluke that he gets those big time shots. It's because he fills in the rotations to the right spot. His cuts off ball make the rest of the team better because he's taking guys with him. And that is what I'm going to close with because Robert Horry is one of my favorite players of all time because of these things. Josh, handshake right here. Good matchup. But may the best man win.
Right back.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. That was our first episode of Hoop Clash. Make sure you like the channel, subscribe, and comment who you think would win, Cameron or Josh. Thank you guys, and have a great night.